Peter Tatchell, the human rights activist, is a friend of Paul OGrady's. They met back in the 1980s and have been close ever since. So just personally sorry for your loss and condolences to you, because it's very hard for all of his friends. This morning we were talking about the fact his friend and producer Malcolm had seen him just hours before he died. Just that story that Mohammed tells is a measure of the man, isn't it?
Absolutely. He was such a kind person. Anybody in trouble, anybody who had a need, if Paul was around, he'd try and do his best to help. And, you know, my heart goes out to Paul's husband, Andre, and everyone I knew who loved him. He was a great, wonderful person, so kind and compassionate. And, you know, he was a great entertainer, a great comedian, but he was also a much-admired campaigner for animal rights and for LGBT+ equality. In 1987, he was doing a gig at the gay pub in London, the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, when the police did one of their routine raids. And Paul told...
I think for younger viewers, why were they routinely raiding a pub?
Back in the 1980s and beyond, the police were targeting the LGBT+ community. It was pure homophobia. There'd been a partial decriminalisation of homosexuality in 1967, but not a full decriminalisation in England and Wales until 2003. So the police were using all these residue laws to really harass and victimise the community. And Paul was there about to go on stage, and he told the tale that he was in his dressing room when these policemen burst in. And his first instinct was that they were strippers and part of the show. When he went on stage, he saw the police manhandling the customers wearing rubber gloves, because this was the height of the AIDS pandemic, and ignorant and bigoted police believed that if you touched a gay man, you get HIV. So he shouted out to the coppers, "Oh, good, you're here. You're going to help with the washing up."
And he was going to lead a campaign, wasn't he, to demand an apology for that harassment and discrimination.
That's right. He never got an apology himself, but he was working with my Peter Tatchell Foundation to launch a campaign in a couple of months' time to call on the police to make an apology for the decades of harassment and victimisation of LGBT+ people. Tens of thousands of people, mostly gay and bisexual men, were arrested under those ancient laws that were not fully repealed until 2003. And he wanted that apology not just for himself, but for everybody, the unsung, unknown people who'd been dragged to court, sometimes jailed, given huge fines. It was shocking, and he was very angry.
I presume it's very early to ask you, but I presume you'll be carrying on with that campaign now.
Absolutely, and it'll be in memoriam to Paul. You know, the campaign is ever more important. You know, we've got all the quotes, all the videos were done, ready to go.
Oh, good.
So we'll probably use those in some way with permission of Andre, his husband. But, you know, the campaign will go ahead, and I think it's undoubtedly what Paul would have wanted.
For many people, Lily Savage was their first experience of drag queens, seeing somebody in drag. I mean, he was a literally, physically, a larger-than-life character when he was Lily Savage. How important was his act?
Well, of course, he was breaking down prejudice. He was using his humour and wit to challenge homophobia and other forms of prejudice, but also to challenge those very strict gender roles, you know, to say that you can be a man and, you know, dress and have fun in women's clothes. You can use that as a way of challenging not just homophobia, but also misogyny. I mean, he loved women. His drag was not anti-woman, it was pro-women's rights, pro-LGBT rights. And he was also, you know, he's got a very, very cuddly image, but he was a very fierce socialist. You know, growing up in a lot of his life in the Merseyside area, he had a profound hatred of conservatives. Of course, he knew personally and loved particular individual conservatives, but he was a socialist through and through, and a Republican. He did not like the monarchy. He loved Princess Diana because of the work she did for HIV and AIDS, but generally he was not a friend of the royal family.
Wow.
He felt that it was time that they were history.
Of course, he did something with the Queen Consort Camilla at Battersea Dogs Home. So
that's right. Yeah.
Last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he had general principles, but individual affections.
That's right. You know, and that's the measure of the man.
Yeah.
He had his principles, but he always looked to the human. So if a person may have been a Conservative but a good person and was doing good things, he would work with them.
Paula on Twitter says, I met Paul OGrady and Cilla Black at Malaga Airport in the late 90s when Lily Savage was at the height of success. I knew I recognised him, but couldn't work out why. He quickly bent down on one knee, stuck out his tongue and gave me a wink and a wave. Such a genuine, happy star. R.I.P. They were very good friends, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Cilla was, quite pro-Margaret Thatcher, which Paul hated, but he loved her as a person. And they did have this great bond and this friendship lasting many decades.
And also on radio, of course.
Yeah.
He connected with people, didn't he? And he had played... Well, he'd done his last Radio 2 show. I'm not sure, do we have, Stuart, we're going to get that, his sort of payoff from his Radio 2 show is very emotional. But
he said it was the longest job he had ever held down, 14 years, that radio show. And he was due to move to a new station. I mean...
To Boom.
This is the strange thing about Talking Today. This wasn't someone whose life was naturally at an end. He was going to carry on with Annie. He was going to move to Boom Radio. I mean, it's a shocking and sudden passing. Yeah,
I just think to myself, if he'd lived, we would have had so many more years of happiness and joy that he would have given us.
So this was his payoff from BBC Radio 2. It was in November last year that it was announced he was going to join Boom, and he presented a show on Christmas Day, and I think it was the biggest show that they had broadcast. But this is his payoff from BBC Radio.
So I'm hanging up my headphones, but listen, thank you for all your messages, for your lost shops, your pubs and for your friends and your deceased pets, and to everyone who's taken part in the show. I've really, really enjoyed my 14 years. And Malcolm, thank you so much to you. Anyway, listen, thank you very, very much for listening. I really, really appreciate it because, let's face it, it wouldn't have been the same without you, would it?
Well, it's not going to be the same without Paul OGrady, is it?
He was one of a kind, an incredibly talented, kind and generous person. And I'll miss him a lot. I think everybody who knew and worked with him will miss him as well. No one can replace him. And it's such a sad day.
Peter, thank you so much for coming in on such a difficult morning to pay tribute to your friend, Paul OGrady.
Thank you.
Well, joining us now to share his memories is actor Nigel Havers. Now, Nigel, you starred with Paul in pantomime.
I did. I did.
Not just once, many times.
Many times. And the great thing about Paul, what a sad day, anyway, was that he was exactly as you imagined him to be, which was very warm and friendly and very funny. And he used to love a good rant.
Did he? What would he rant about?
Pretty much anything you put in his way. But, and he would do it on stage. Suddenly, out of the blue, he'd have a major rant about how he hated pantomime. He'd do that on stage. It was brilliant. Really.
His drag name, of course, was Lily Savage, and he did have a savage streak, but it was always done with wit, humour and a warmth, wasn't it? So you never felt like you were being savaged.
No, you weren't being savaged. But, I mean, he got into a real old state, but we were all laughing so much that it didn't go anywhere, really. But
because it's interesting, because many comedians are actually quite quiet off stage, but no, he was still the centre of the room, was he?
He was, and I could, if I was on stage, I could hear him coming in, from the wings. I could hear this voice. He'd be starting off, well, from his dressing room, really, straight onto the stage.
And he was still performing, of course. He's due to be in Annie. I mean, he'd already sold out the Liverpool events, and he'd just performed at Edinburgh. We're getting people getting in touch saying that they'd just seen him. So there didn't seem to be any indication, although I know that he had problems before with his heart, well documented, and, of course, COVID as well, which he'd caught and not had a good experience with at all.
No.
But hugely unexpected, and his partner has said unexpected but peaceful. One of the things that people know him for, of course, most recently, you would have known him for, was his love of dogs.
Absolutely.
I mean, did he bring animals with him when he was performing?
And we all used to bring our dogs into the theatre, which is fantastic, really. He's the only person I've ever seen make Julian Clary corpse on stage. Was Paul OGrady, and Julian would become speechless, which is very unusual for him. And they were very, very close friends, and they lived next door to each other for quite a while. So I know Julian will be very upset.
Yes, there's a huge number of people who,
Yeah.
for whom this, you know, they did not see this coming. When I mentioned the dogs, of course, it was his programme, The Love of Dogs, multi-award winning, and you know why, because it was just so popular,
Yeah.
so warm-hearted. And, of course, he had to resist the temptation every time he filmed it to take home one of the dogs. Let's have a look.
Can I see your pass, please, love?
You know who I am.
It doesn't matter. Nobody gets past me without showing the pass. Nobody
know
gets
who I
in,
am.
nobody gets out. Look at this house here. I'm not saying it was you, Barley, but there's something in there that... Oh, I don't even want to talk about it. Who shut the gate? Have you shut this gate? Hello? Hello? Come on, take it easy now. Don't be dragging me around. Come on, this way. Oh, my God. Come on, this way. Go on.
Oh, it's just
The
absolutely
thing is, he
lovely.
treated dogs like people.
He did.
And that's the key to it, really. And so he loved them. You know, there was me, a dog, Julian in the dressing room, and they were all people.
I know, and
But I tell you what, it was I was fascinated this morning when we were hearing earlier on. Kevin had actually asked him, if you had to choose a strange question. You had to choose between children and dogs. And actually, of course, you're thinking, all we know about children. Every time, if there was a starving child or a starving dog, I'd feed the starving child. So it wasn't his only passion. It wasn't his only passion out there, and he was an ambassador for Save the Children too, I believe.
Indeed,
yeah. And for the Peter Tatchell Foundation as well. I mean, he was a powerful campaigner.
Absolutely.
He wasn't just an entertainer.
No, no.
He used that role and that experience, didn't he?
And he was a very elegant man in every way. He dressed beautifully, he always looked great, and very elegant.
Do you know what? He was the very first guest that we had on this show on Good Morning Britain when we launched back in 2014. Ben and I were lucky enough to interview him on the sofa. I think we have a little bit of that now.
I was in Switzerland and we stopped off at this hotel for some lunch. And I looked at this guy outside this hotel and I thought, he's familiar. And he said, you know, you nod. And he nodded back at me. And I went over to him. Actually, it was George Clooney. But he looked a wreck. Yes! And he looked like a little old man. You know, the hair was everywhere. He had sallow skin. He had these big, roomy, watery eyes. And he was sort of stood there and I thought, my God, mate, the camera loves you.
It does, doesn't it?
And that made my year, believe
made
you
all
me.
the bad
George
days.
Clooney looked like a dog.
You see, he's the sort of person who can say that and absolutely get away with it. It's absolutely brilliant.
We
Nigel,
really, really miss him.
I know. I'm sorry for your loss personally, of
Indeed.
course, as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts with him there.
Pleasure.
And of course, Lorraine, he was a regular guest on your show as well, wasn't he? Yeah.
He was. Do you know, I was laughing there listening to that story. And that's the thing, it's so, so sad. But every time you think of him and you remember, you know, when he's come on the show or when I've met him, you know, outside, you just smile and you laugh. And that was when I turned 50 and I was sitting, they said to me, we've got a surprise for you. You don't have to do anything. And Paul hosted the whole show. And do you remember when he had his own tea time show? It was such a laugh. He was doing a strip then.
Yeah.
And he had his own show at tea time and I stood in for him. And I have never been on a show, apart from this one, where the atmosphere was so lovely. And that comes from the top, just so kind. Like I was saying, dogs loved him and dogs know. They just know, don't they? They really, you know, they always know when somebody is a good person.
Absolutely.
And he was a good person.